All right. Welcome to this might be our fourth or fifth stream at this point. Couple technical notes to start. In my previous stream, which will be visible on YouTube but would not have been watched on Twitch on account of my then 0 viewers, I tried to use my instrument mic as per a recommendation of one of my previous viewers, and there might still be a good way to use it, but for now I'm reverting back to the laptop speaker, because to try to use that mic on my desk caused the clicking and the keyboard sounds to register as like this low, annoying, bassy tone, and it's actually audible throughout the YouTube recording of that stream, or the YouTube posting of that stream, and it bothered me to listen to it, so I assume it would do the same for listeners on YouTube. So I'm back to the slightly shittier vocal quality without the same kinds of annoying tones. I'm going to start in a second. This stream actually has a particular theme, which is NPCs. And really I'm going to be discussing NPCs on two levels. The first would be the actual aesthetic formal context. Fancy way to say video game NPCs, right? What are NPCs in video games? Especially in the context of RPGs. What kind of purpose do they serve? Are there any things we haven't thought about yet? Or are there things that the construction of RPGs might make it hard to think about in terms of how NPCs behave? One quick example off the top of my head, and I'll start now with the game, is that we don't really think too much when we're playing RPGs about the mutual interactions of NPCs. Most NPCs are construed in terms of their relationship to the player character, and it's actually quite computationally demanding to try to design an NPC AI that allows social interactions, right? Interactions among the NPCs themselves, independently of the player. Even with MMORPGs, this is kind of the case, right? It's kind of difficult to envision in RPGs a world that goes on without the player, that has its own kind of subsistent existence.
You have my
right?
ear, citizen.
I'm gonna see. What is my quest? Alright, I gotta investigate the strange happenings in a settlement north of Imperial City. So I guess that will be my in-game business. But yeah, as I was saying, it doesn't naturally occur to designers or players to think about how NPCs interact among each other independently, right? The sort of social existence of the world without the player is something kind of inferred but not specified. So that's the one level I was going to talk about it, and the other one was the empirical level, that, NPC is kind of a term. Why is that person? So many people they're farming while invisible. They've got their weird chameleon-ass outfits. Anyway, let's see what he has to say.
Dr. Durham in the inn. I'm tired of this minstrel's freak show our town has turned into.
Is that why you're invisible? Honestly, you're part of the freak show if you've just got that axe. Or plow. What is that? It's a plow, I think. So, there are NPCs at the level of video games, and then there are what the internet would refer to as IRL, in real life, NPCs. The more fancy way to put that is that there are NPCs at the empirical sociological level. And I wanted to make one very crucial clarification. Where's this fucking N? Is there a lower level? Before I actually start talking about those. Let's try this. Which is that no one needs to be an NPC, right? So nobody...
Excuse me.
Okay.
We have a small problem that we hope you can help us
They're
with.
all invisible.
You may be wondering why you can't see me. We are all wondering the same thing.
Okay, this is quite the pickle.
Everyone in Ayleswell suddenly became invisible several weeks ago. It was sort of fun at first, but the novelty is definitely worn off now. You can imagine how difficult it is to run an inn while invisible. Once you get a reputation as a haunted inn, you can just forget about it. So we've all been keeping quiet, hoping the spell will wear off. But we're running out of patience. We're sure it was Ankatar's doing. We can't find him. If you can help us, we will be extremely grateful.
Like Ankatar can't find you.
He's a wizard who took up residence in the ruins of Fort Caractacus a couple of years ago. He's caused us no end of trouble with his magical experiments, but nothing as bad as this. We tried to find him, but had no luck. If he's still living in the fort, he's hiding from us, and no wonder. If you could find him and get him to remove this cursed invisibility, we will all be in your debt. It's just to the southeast of here. Follow the path down the hill, but watch out for the invisible monsters that infest the ruins.
Every quest has its own little snag.
Greetings to you.
Hold on,
Have
let me...
you talked to Ankatar?
I want to know more about him.
We're pretty sure he's...
Oh, so you can't tell me more
Aiming
about
is
him.
faked. You think those guys are getting killed?
You guys are giving me the creeps.
It's just...
Okay, so I have to fight invisible monsters, and talk to a wizard who's likely ashamed of what he's done. I really will add, I like this premise. I don't see this sort of stuff in Skyrim. I feel like there's some more singularity and specificity to the actual design of the side quests in Oblivion than in Skyrim, which end up being, you know, fetch and crawl quests, but without the same level of like narrative detail, such as an entire town becoming invisible. I kind of want to see more of that in Elder Scrolls 6. Anyway, as I was saying, one thing to note about, I guess you could call them IRL NPCs, is that they don't need to be that way, right? Really what it means to be an NPC in real life is that these NPCs, like NPCs in video games, don't actually... they're basically pathologically incapable, on account of the way society has hurt them, of actually interrogating the collective social basis for their own behavior. So an example where this comes up is Reddit, right? People talk about the stereotypical Redditor, right? And what the Redditor basically is it's a guy who gets off on appearing right, and to find smart-seeming ways to stay dumb as hell, right? This can the very classic example is this sort of nitpickiness, right? Oh, got an invisible wolf. Oh, I think it's a little harder to hit while it's invisible. Oh, maybe not. So one, he's a TikTok creator, about 10 years older than me. You might have heard of him if you're listening in anonymously through YouTube. His name is Slappable Jerk. And that's kind of what he does, right, is he invents different... I mean, of course, they have precedent in real life.
Go away! I don't want whatever you're selling.
Are you invisible? But he invents, like, the most obnoxious possible NPCs. His biggest one is the average Redditor. But there's also, like, the sort of the insecure boyfriend. There's the neighborhood boomer, right? And what all these people have in common is that they've learned to behave a certain way. And whenever...
To leave me alone. Go away.
Okay, shut up. You go away. Whenever and it's told from the point of view of the person interacting with the NPC, which is actually what makes his videos...
Oblivion take you. What
Okay.
is it you want from me? Yes, I have been working on a new invisibility spell. As you can see, it works quite well. Why? Oh,
He doesn't even know.
really? Everyone in town? That must have been what all the shouting was about a few weeks ago. I'm afraid I was engrossed in an experiment that required my full attention. You see, in order to increase the efficacy of the spell, the radius was likely to approach the... Oh, never mind. I don't mean to bore you.
Sure, tell me more. I'm curious now.
Ah, a fellow mage. Please excuse my rudeness earlier. I find most people extremely tedious, completely ignorant of the arcane.
I know a few things.
I came out here to get some privacy for my research. Instead, I was constantly bothered by the local peasantry. The explosions are scaring the sheep, or a plague of rats ate all our crops. Every day, another complaint. No understanding of the pitfalls of experimental magic. Finally, I decided that permanent invisibility was the only way to get some peace and quiet. I know you're about to quote Vanto's third law. Don't worry, I have not actually found a way to violate the conservation of perception. The invisibility is not actually permanent. You can tell the villagers not to worry. It will wear off eventually. Well, in a year or two, maybe a bit more. There's no way to be absolutely sure. That's the exciting thing about basic research.
This guy's kind of an asshole. He doesn't know it yet. He's a bit of an NPC.
Really? I find being invisible quite refreshing. But if it will get everyone to leave me alone, fine. I did work out a counterspell last week. If I can just put my hand to it. Ah, here. Stand in the center of town to make sure you get everyone. Oh, and make sure... Never mind. It should be fine. Yes, just read the scroll in the middle of town. It should work. Although, just in case, it might be best if you wore this ring while you were casting the spell. I make them myself. Very useful for this kind of research. Not that I think anything will go wrong. Serious side effects are highly unlikely.
Okay, this guy...
Goodbye.
This is what happens when you let science do its own thing. Where was I? I was talking about NPCs. I'm gonna go up and finish this dumb quest. Actually kind of fun, but... probably need that, right? What effects does it actually have? Anything? No. There's like a in-game narrative effect, if anything. So Slappable Jerk, he's this content creator who basically his aesthetic gimmick, and not to, degrade it, I like his videos, is to represent the player character's perspective on NPCs in real life. That's how I would try to summarize it. And what all these people have in common is that you can't point out to them the reason they're behaving a particular way without them, trying to guardrail it back into their normal behavior, right? And this relates again. And I'm gonna talk a bit more about my experiences with Reddit lately, because I might have said I was done posting there, and I am, except insofar as I still keep getting comments, right? And a lot of those comments are from people who just keep commenting. Like they keep trying to find ways to prove me wrong under my posts. They'll like wait a day or two and then they'll come back and fucking comment again. And it's kind of irritating because I do want to respond to make sure that everything's clear to other people who aren't annoying in the way they are. Right, middle of town. Let's see. So yeah, this creator is interesting, and I'll talk for a second before I start. I want to hit a nice stopping point in my speech, because he will portray, for instance, the average Redditor, and what the average Redditor is someone who finds a smart-seeming way to stay dumb as hell, and like he finds clever-ish. Oh, what are you doing?
Have you talked to Ankatar yet? Can he make us visible again?
You look visible already.
Ankatar gave you a scroll to get rid of the invisibility? Fantastic! What are you waiting for? Farewell.
Okay, so this Redditor, he finds clever seeming ways actually to avoid thinking about how he's just an asshole to others, right? And the thing about NPCs when they all exist within a collective internet setting is actually that they have an easier time doing this on the internet than in real life. Trying to point out the collective basis of their sort of regressive behaviors, their unconscious misery that they all compound among each other. They ostracize each other by accident. Trying to point that out immediately gets a negative reaction publicly, right? So this came up with these users who kept responding, who kept talking about me and how I hated downvotes every time I tried to actually write about downvotes in a manner that extended beyond me. So that is kind of a good definition of an empirical NPC, an NPC IRL, who I will add still doesn't need to be that way, but has been hurt by society, right, in a way that they're not conscious of and not allowed to really address appropriately. What an NPC is basically defined by on that level is someone who doesn't actually interrogate the sort of real basis of their behavior, who every time you try to bring up to them why they're being an asshole, they retreat back into their pre-existing categories that they use to interpret the entire world around them. And they won't think past a certain point. They'll categorically refuse to think, and if you actually point out the way they're doing this, they'll immediately insult you. They'll usually project onto you. So your words elicit an uncomfortable feeling that they then immediately attach to you. And this came out actually in a DM conversation I had with one of these people on Reddit, which I will talk about as soon as I cast this spell, or once I deal with whatever aftermath there is. That's the scroll.
Thank you. I can't tell you how good it feels to be able to see myself again. My sisters, on the other hand, I wouldn't mind if they had stayed invisible. Me. Friend, you are welcome at the Ayleswell Inn anytime, free of charge.
It's actually kind of nice.
Good day.
Actually, I need to take a nap.
There's never any charge for you, friend.
Excellent.
Take care.
That's actually pretty convenient for my player, considering this is right above Imperial City, so I'll probably be in and out of this region a lot. Okay, so I thought that I would summarize a DM conversation I had with one of these Redditors.
How are you?
Hey, I'm good. I just got a free room and board for life, so I'm doing pretty well. Excellent. So they were one of the ones who originally responded, and they said that, I don't know, they were one-sidedly dismissive of my post. So my post contained a joke, but the joke was really meant to explain a specific point. And people who didn't really want to consider the explanation said that the joke was bad. But the specific point was, it went a lot further than just the idea of making a joke post on Reddit. Let's see. I don't know, they called it something that I wrote anti-Nietzschean. What was it? Oh, it was the comparison of Nietzsche to Marx, right? The sort of explaining Nietzsche in terms of, I think, the exchange principle, right? Which actually does have a real relationship to Nietzsche's philosophy, since Nietzsche is really talking about nihilism as a crisis of modernity. So modernity is a condition that threatens permanent nihilism, which is to say, it actually... One sec, let's see what else. I don't really care that much. It actually prevents us from interrogating the actual ends towards which our thinking is deployed, right? So it's a crisis. Modernity is a crisis of ends and means, right? Our thinking might as well be serving any purpose, which is kind of the way that Nietzsche's philosophy is trying to grasp the historical origin of nihilism. Like, why does nihilism come about, and what kind of ways of addressing it are we actually left with? And for Nietzsche, what this really does is it tasks us with transformation, and not just on an individual, but on a collective level. You know, man ought to become overman. man is a stepping stone to humankind's transcendence, which is, potentially a real process. So I explained why, actually, the exchange principle, right, the idea of commodities being equivalent in terms of socially necessary labor time. Let's see what I want to do next. Actually, when it penetrates into consciousness, right, the worker's consciousness is really pretty much indifferent, except insofar as the labor power, the capacity to involve oneself in production, right? That's when it becomes relevant to nihilism. So that's the very specific mediation I pointed out. And when I did that, they basically replied that Imperial City. Let's see. I'll start with a side quest in Imperial City, but that'll bring me closer to the main quest. We'll go right. So when I pointed that out, they talked about Nietzsche's critique of Marx being like Bakunin's an anarchist. And I explained the way it actually wasn't, right? So Nietzsche's critique of the left doesn't exhaust Marx, because Marx also was a critic of the left, right? Marx was inquiring into the sort of one-sidedness of the left so far. Marx didn't invent socialism, he critiqued it. And when I explained that, the guy got really snarky towards me. He started talking about how he wasn't going to go down the Marx rabbit hole, that he started digging anyway. And then eventually he just started insulting me and saying that I was a narcissist, which when you point out the way that people are actually mediating their appearance on the internet, what they'll do is call you a narcissist. They'll immediately bring it back to you. And then finally, I decided this guy's just being a fucking NPC. This guy is trying to find clever ways to backtrack from the fact that he was simply wrong, that Nietzsche's critique of the left is the same as Bakunin's critique of Marx. It's not. It's factually not, right? So I eventually, I actually tried to work through more of this in DMs, right? Because actually the public setting was preventing him from considering some of these points I was making. And it didn't. I think it got to the point where he was about to see it, right? Because every time that I tried to bring up, he could not take the heat. And every time that I tried to bring up the way, sorry, I have a viewer. Hello. Every time that I tried to bring up the way that he was just trying to backtrack away from being wrong about this one specific thing, he brought it to me, and he actually stalked my profile, right? And started trying to dig up dirt on me, which is not the only he's not the only NPC who has done that, right? Another person did that. Where the fuck am I? Okay, I need to get back on the trail. And he eventually what happened was I drew attention to the way every time I tried to bring up the broader issue, right? Which is that Reddit, by virtue of the very design of its site, makes users unconsciously miserable, because it's kind of a social contract that they all kind of implicitly sign when they get on the site, is you can't complain about downvotes, and in return you're allowed to downvote other people who make you feel bad, right? That's basically what Reddit users do that makes them more miserable. And every time I pointed that out, he brought it right back to me, and said that I was derailing the conversation when I tried to bring it away from me, right? So you see how the projection gets projected, right? And eventually what happened was he started responding less and less frequently. After I started writing words that I believe in DMs he was actually reading and comprehending, but still didn't want to admit that he knew. And then finally I said, I think you're starting to see it. I can tell by the way that your responses keep taking longer. And as soon as I said that, he dug his heels right back in and he freaked out on me. We haven't, and then he's still commenting under other people's posts, disagreeing with me, saying, yeah, this guy's just crazy, right? When I was really just concretely explaining all these things. And I've been engaging each of the individual points that these people are making, right? And I've been giving them credit where credit's due. Because one of the users who also was trying to say I was being whiny was still at least directly quoting from, Genealogy of Morality, and trying to, leverage an argument against my point in terms of the text, right? And the specific thing they were actually arguing against was that downvotes were they could be explained in terms of Nietzsche's category of resentment, the assigning of an opposite value. but really they can, right? Because what happens, and this goes back to Nietzsche on slave and master morality. Nietzsche's the basic thrust of his argument is that slaves they feel both ways about how they're treated. And this is, of course, hard for them to admit, right? Because the treatment of a slave, an ancient slave, specifically in Nietzsche's context, the treatment of a slave as a slave gives them security, right? So there's a way they feel both ways about it. And there's a way that actually concretely addressing the situation of their slavery is blocked off, because they're slaves. They can't do much about it. So the slaves say that they're right, their values are right, when really their values often involve like a sort of like necessary level of personal degradation, and that the masters are wrong, right? And then when people come along who don't need that security, the security of slavery, it reminds them immediately of their own ambivalence, and they project it as the immorality, right? Which means, what it means is that people who actually try to find a way out of, who try to help the slaves find a way out of slavery, will immediately get, they'll immediately become seen as wrong, right? And this has relevance for contemporary society, but it goes beyond slavery, because Nietzsche is kind of construing this historically as an ancient dynamic, right? Like ancient Roman slaves. Christianity for him is slave morality, right? It becomes slave morality. But the oppression that we experience in society today isn't quite oppression in the sense of a distinct sociological group, cramming its foot down the throat of another, right? It's not just a matter of one group against another. The oppression is often anonymous, right? It can happen in the context of websites like Reddit, where the site, simply by virtue of its design, which no one person had a hand in making, makes it hard for users actually to engage discussions without mediating how they appear publicly, mediating their appearance to the average user. And it makes them and each other more miserable, and then the person who points that out is immediately said to be whining, right? When really, I don't care about downvotes. Like, I'm fine writing words that I know will get downvotes. It stresses me out because I'm annoyed at how fucking unwilling to consider these problems people are. So I'll admit that there's actually quite a level of stress there, and that's part of why I'll probably never post to Reddit again, short of receiving further replies to my own comments, and that's why I stopped. But I still keep getting replies from NPCs. There are a couple more things I was actually going to mention. Yeah, I talked about Slappable Jerk, who's the guy who does like NPCs from the player character's perspective in real life. But yeah, another way to put what an NPC actually is that it's someone who's depoliticized, someone who actually is incapable of considering questions of how to change society because they're not actually able to address the social basis of their own behavior. Yeah, worrying about downvotes is worrying about what other people think of you in real life. But it's like the social shame becomes intensified because it's only you and your words. And the thing is, on Reddit, what's very much the case is that you don't see who sees, right? So in this DM argument, this guy kept saying that nobody cares or you're not convincing anybody. When A, like two people actually did publicly express that I was convincing them, and then B, he wouldn't know who else was convinced, right? So nobody sees who sees. And actually, the way that Reddit is structured will always be that way. And what it does is it makes people puff up. It makes people want to mediate their appearances even more than in real life. Where in real life, there might actually be a context for vulnerability that Reddit doesn't give, right? Because people can see that you're seeing them. No, I don't donate to the homeless in this game. I think they need to get some fucking jobs. The viewer says either we need to remove Reddit downvotes or add a dislike button to real-life conversations. I would prefer not to have a dislike button in real-life conversations. But my thought, really, this is what Reddit ought to have done a long time ago, is it's upvotes and then flagging anything that's inappropriate or rule-breaking so that the mods actually have to review it, right? Because you shouldn't be downvoting anything that should really be on the site. That would have been fine for someone to say. And this is pretty much Reddit's real explicit policy. It's just that downvoting... Where am I? Downvoting goes in contradiction to the actual stated policy of the site because they know the way that they gain their reward cycles of their users and keep them miserably dependent upon Reddit, right? And it became evident the moment I tried to point it out because people kept talking about how I cared about downvotes and they couldn't have ever cared about downvotes. Meanwhile, downvoting my comments, right? I didn't downvote anyone. I upvoted even people who like who were being kind of jackasses. Strange notes. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. But yeah, and the other thing about this sort of, I wanted to talk for a bit. Ooh, that looks like what I'm looking for. These Mythic Dawn guys, they don't seem like good people. So this slappable jerk has his average Redditor kind of character he does. And you walk the path of the new dawn. You would destroy the septum spawns, liberated from your chains. And this guy should have been a rapper in modern times. I feel like the couplets are a little flat here. I feel like he could have varied up the rhyme scheme. His wolf's gaze you will follow. Behind a tree. I gotta look for a tree. Oh. There's a shrine. Okay, I'll just keep doing this shit. But his thing is, he has comment sections where people accuse each other of being Redditors. And the thing about that is that the people who are ridiculing each other on the internet are what the real Redditors are. It doesn't fucking matter. Yeah, we need ambiguity to stay sane because actually humans are allowed to think further through ambiguity,
What is it,
right?
citizen?
Not knowing the true meaning of what others say is what allows them to think further about it. And it's actually not, it's not appropriate just to judge yourself exclusively in terms of how others see you in that moment. And this is something I've learned by embarrassing myself for 12 years. In a way that did cause me a lot of pain until I recognized that sometimes it wasn't because I was wrong that it was causing me pain, but because I wanted people to like me, and maybe that's something that's not always feasible. But as I was saying, like people accuse each other of being Redditors, but really, like, I was thinking of having one single rule for this Twitch stream. You know, when I get more viewers, is no ridicule, right? That includes, like, you know, the standard rule of hate and bigotry. But what it really means is trying to write the words that hurt someone's feelings publicly. And I can immediately recognize it because I've seen it, and my own psychological constitution makes me immediately receptive to it, which is why I felt it necessary to engage these downvotes. Okay, we're going all the way over here. But not everyone immediately can. That said, they can learn how to recognize it. So really, like it goes beyond simply discriminating against someone, but actually, like, trying to hurt them with words should be just categorically wrong, considered categorically wrong. So when people, like, on this guy's Instagram or TikTok call each other Redditors, that's the way they're being Redditors. They're ridiculing each other, right? Is that they're trying to find ways to hide in their own, like, presumed rightness without actually thinking about whether they could be wrong. Yeah. So I see my viewer has said Reddit. They see Reddit as more of a conversational platform than to rate opinions, and this is true, right? I feel like the best subreddits actually don't operate upon upvotes and downvotes, but this becomes less and less tenable because that's a feature that actually prevents people from speaking their minds. So I think I had a friend whose one of his tweets was funny. It was like, Reddit is the site you go to, like, decide within 30 minutes of being on it that you suddenly want to do a DIY bed frame build, right? And that's historically kind of how I've used Reddit. It's where people ought to learn from each other, and where people with weird niche knowledge can, like, teach others, right? And that happens on the smaller subreddits and the more informative and technical subreddits, more so than the ones where, like, intellectual topics get frequently discussed. Like, if there is one critique that Nietzsche would have had of contemporary society, it would have taken the form of how shit the r/Nietzsche subreddit is, right? Because it's a bunch of people discussing this thing they call herd mentality that they learned about from Nietzsche, apparently, in a social context mediated by the internet that actually pressures people into conformity by virtue of, like, its very structure. Yeah, Reddit is also, in response to my viewer, a very good place to seek random-ass help from years ago, right? And such help, I believe, will get less and less frequent in the present. It's like there's usually someone who had the exact same specific problem as you 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And they gave, like, the most cogent explanation possible, and they basically resolved the problem in advance for you. That's a good way to use Reddit, and that's how that's the way to use Reddit without even having to post there, you know. But there comes to be a lot of noise on account of how shitty the people who use Reddit make themselves and each other by accident. So just in general, like, this is kind of the overall parallel I was drawing between NPCs in game and in real life, is that neither of them can really explicitly interrogate the basis of their behavior, right? And if you try to point that out to them in real life, they get mad, they become assholes. Whereas in video games, you aren't even given the option. You're not even giving them you're not even given as a player character the option to ask about their behavior, right? It's taken for granted within the pre-existing world. Yeah, Reddit, and this is true of a lot of internet communities, but particularly Reddit, especially as it originally arose historically, as my viewer says, it's kind of a catalog of collective knowledge, right? And that really ought to be what the internet as a whole has been. The internet is what humanity would have needed from the beginning, right? Not to fuck itself up so hard. But we wouldn't have been able to until our actual technology became advanced enough to have it. But cavemen would have really loved the internet because they would have recognized that the reason they were doing those paintings is because of how horny they were, right? And that there's better art out there. But Reddit in general, like I gotta kill that guy. Oh, that's not killed. That's not murder. But the internet the issue is that it's an unmastered social form. So people pretend they already know how to use it as their way of not getting called out on using it wrong collectively. But really, everyone uses it wrong when they try to fucking talk about what a Redditor is and like decide who is and isn't a Redditor, you know. And they generalize about each other in a way that's psychologically unconsciously harmful. Yeah, pilgrims would have shit their pants on Reddit. I feel like, you know, this doesn't necessarily mean that the internet is necessarily historically regressive, that it necessarily depoliticizes people. The point I had brought up in a previous stream is that it's an unmastered civil social form. But the point is, like, you do kind of have to figure out who the NPCs are when it comes to the question of politics over the internet. Because what an NPC is, really, in the end, is someone who needs to be told to fuck off from the internet in the right way. They need to be they need to know, really, for pragmatic reasons, why they shouldn't be doing this shit, because they're actually not willing to interrogate their behavior. So it's like you'll get made fun of if you keep doing this if you keep trying to make fun of others. It's really the only way to get through to an NPC, right? Is you have to punish them in terms of their own image, and that's something very conservatively done, right? I don't think you should just jump to thinking people are NPCs, because society puts us in situations where we all have to act like NPCs around each other. But the point is that once you've tried and tested whether someone is actually willing to change their mind on anything, whether they're not just getting off on the appearance of already being smart, and you found that, for instance, like they just become really rude and nasty, right? Then these are really the people that shouldn't be on the internet in the first place, pretending that they're learning things and teaching others. They use the internet to feel always right, and that's kind of what Reddit becomes historically more and more. That's what the karma function is. It's the way that grown children take it as like, oh yeah, see, I've got 50,000 karma. I can't just be wrong. It's not that simple, right? That's what it comes to psychologically represent for people who use Reddit that way. And it really ought to be obvious, but posing it eminently like that is within Reddit immediately gets these people reacting in a way that can actually obscure the issue for those who aren't insecure in the way that they are, but still don't really know what to know. They don't know what to think. So that's why I feel the need to respond even to these stragglers. Is that they don't actually fucking deserve the last word.
Ugh, what is it?
Because the last word is just the way that they're going to take my words and rationalize their own behavior back. And this is historically what I've been doing with all these websites I've used in the past. I didn't even use Reddit very much, but these websites I even have accounts on where I used to post sometimes. Ooh, poor wolf. What I've been doing is basically closing out. Like having a huge fucking flame war with multiple people, right? And seeing who I can eventually get politically on my side, right? Who actually recognizes that I have a point, and why the people who disagree with me might be embodying that point in the way that they refuse to consider it. I did this with Facebook. I did it with Reddit. I don't have that many more sites to do it with. I did it with Rate Your Music a while ago, but I still use that website for my own independent writing. I gotta kill these imps. No, these what are they called? I get them confused with. These are imps. The other scamps, imps and scamps. I get confused. Oh. I can kill this other one with shock. Hell yeah. Okay, I'm gonna find a shrine. I'm going to investigate some pretty shady activity on the part of the Mythic Dawn here. I did have a lot to discuss, especially towards the beginning of this stream, about NPCs, and I will continue to discuss things. I will probably actually move eventually to the level of video games for NPC discussions. Because what I originally brought up in this stream is the way that video games really only position the NPCs in relation to the player character. I mean, there are exceptions to this, right? But the way that NPCs interact with each other behind the player character's back is something that is actually very computationally intensive for a video game to have to design. Which is why generally the form that has ended up taking is with multiple player characters, like an MMORPG, rather than like the economy of Oblivion Towns, for example, right? That's very computationally difficult. And I don't necessarily think that means it's impossible. In all the video games I've thought of maybe one day making, which I won't, the question has really been, like, what if the player character had a form of, for example, magical agency that allowed them to influence the interactions NPCs had with each other? That's been one of the premises of a video game I thought of designing. And these are things that we really don't consider because this world is kind of like, looking around at it, it's kind of a 3D cardboard cutout. It's front-facing. I only see what I see, and there's nothing that goes beyond me. That's what the render distance is. It's a sense in which in real life it'd be weird to talk about a render distance. To follow the wolf's gaze. Okay. Oh, I think it's that wolf. Oh, this might be a tree. Well, it is a tree. This might be the tree. Oh, yes it is. Am I doing a fucking Easter egg hunt? Okay. Give me a beat. Just kidding. I don't map these. Contemplate. Yeah, this is just. I had to find another note near the Horned Fiend's Shrine. Oh, Molag Bal's Shrine. That sounds potentially dangerous. But yeah, so these worlds that we experience in RPGs are more or less front-facing. You know, they exist in relation to the player character. And a lot of the sort of features that these worlds develop, which Oblivion was actually advanced in doing, was to sort of that maybe made that appearance seem less flat, was to give the NPCs independent social routines, right? So they went their own way and did their own things. This happens in Skyrim too, and it's kind of been a mainstay of a lot of RPGs since these, right? And you can even see it as an improvement from Morrowind, where the NPCs sort of stand around waiting to be talked to. So I think that that's one important aspect of NPCs in video games, is that I think more perhaps technically and aesthetically sophisticated RPGs to come out in the future ought to more seriously consider the way that NPCs interact among each other when the player's not there. Because players are thrown into an already existing world, and the longer the world goes on with them in it, the more the gravity would seem to shift towards the player's choices as opposed to what happens within the world. It's worth considering to what extent the changes in the world could even be random, right? within and among games. That might cause complaints, or it might be the result. It might result in complaints from players who want reproducibility to their gameplay, but it's worth considering. All right. What are these? We have bandits here. There's random ass hunters and fishermen and such. No, you're fine. I noticed that bandits are pretty much just Khajiit at this point.
Hi there.
What?
Maybe it works. That's how you know. This game encourages racial profiling. Alright, let's check my graphics. I'm noticing some frame drop. I actually do want to have VSync on. I think I already set that. I will need to find a more consistent or persistent improvement to my graphics in between streams, probably. I'll have to remember to do that. Yeah, I think that about wraps up the intensive theoretical discussion for a little bit. I want to figure out what's going on with all these shrines. Oh! Alright, let's switch to sword. Sword and shield this guy. Oh, there's a... Come on. Oh, you need some... Just barely hanging on there with his health. I feel like a two-handed weapon probably isn't the best for a lightly armored character, but it was fun to try out. Let's switch to my... What we got? Okay, does that show on my... No, it doesn't. I was curious the extent to which the shield showed my character in the inventory screen. Alright. This guy's sensitive to shock damage. He really doesn't take that many. He looks so terrified. Sorry, buddy. Sorry for what I've done. Hold on one moment. Alright. I need a better one-handed sword if I'm going to keep trying this sword thing. Dead as hell. Alright. Trying to find this Molag Bal shrine. Yeah, so I think I've wrapped up, for now, most of the discussion of NPCs I was talking about. In video games, we don't really consider them in their interactions among each other. There might be some way to tie that into NPCs on the IRL level, but I haven't thought about it yet. But a game would be interesting that tried to think of the world as something that exists without the player, that goes on without the player. Let's see. It's going to be a bit of an uphill climb here. I'm not looking forward to it. Hold on. I need to fix my fucking graphics, man.